Hello, and welcome to Snails and Fairy Dust. Today, I wanted to do a heart-themed project since Valentine's is less than a month away. And I also wanted to focus on square stitch because I think it's a really useful stitch for any beginning beader to have. You can download the pattern for this project from my website. It's free, a free pattern, links below, and it will give you this little chart so you can follow along and know exactly where to put the beads. So let's take a look at the supplies we're going to use and get started with this project. Okay, I am using Miyuki Delica beads in size 11. I am also using Fireline beading thread here it is, in a 6-pound weight. I'm going to use that for the upper half of the earring. And for the fringe part, I'm using this nylon beading thread. The brand for this one is KO. Miyuki also makes a really nice beading thread that I like to use. I have a size 12 beading needle. I have these French ear wires. Oops, dropped it. And here we go, closer look at that. I have wire guards, which I'm going to use at the top, sometimes called thread guards as well. I have pliers to put that earring hook on, and I have scissors, and I have my pattern. So let's get started. I'm going to cut about 5 feet of my beading thread. I usually cut about the length of my outstretched arms. I kind of start every project with that length, just so you know. And then I flatten the thread a bit with my fingernails. You want to do that with Fireline to make it easier to thread your needle. And then I pull it about halfway down and I'm ready to get started. I'm going to use a different color bead just to make a little stopper bead for myself to keep the beads from falling off when I start working. So I pull that down towards the end of my thread and then I loop back around and come back up through it. And that just creates this bead that's going to stop everything from falling off. You want to have about a 4-inch tail at the end. Next, I'm going to pick up 11 beads and you'll see that on your pattern. So we're starting with 11 beads. I pull them down and then I sort of wrap it around my finger to hold it in place. And then I'm working from the last bead back up to the first bead. So I pick up one bead and I'm going to go through that last bead towards myself. So bringing the needle towards myself, and I'm going to pull that through. Try not to get my finger in there. Pull that through, and they're going to be sitting next to each other like this, the 2 beads. And then next, I want to take my needle and go back through that bead I just added away from me. So like that. I'm going to pull that through. And now that's my first stitch. And then I pick up another bead and I'm going to go through this second bead. So pull that bead down, come through the second bead towards yourself again. Pull it tight and then come through that bead you've just added away from you. And this is the whole thing, guys. Like, it's so easy. You could totally do this. So let's do it again. Pick up another bead. We're going to go through this third one now. Bring the needle through it towards yourself from the back to the front. And then you take your needle and you put it through the new bead away from yourself. And that's it. We're going to keep doing this to the end of the row. The important thing is you see how I'm tightening up in between each bead, pull those beads, make sure they're sitting close to each other. I like to hold, like now that I have a little bit of work to hold, I like to hold that between my thumbs while I'm doing this. So again, here we're adding another one. We're coming towards ourselves and then away from ourselves. And when I do that final pull, I like to hold it between my thumb and my forefinger just to make sure it's nice and tight in there. So keep working your way across the row like this and make sure you're keeping your stitches tight. You don't want a lot of gaps in between your rows. So take your time, do it right. Don't do what I just did there. And really make sure you have nice, evenly tensioned and spaced stitches. So you see now I'm adding the bluey purple bead because that's what the pattern calls for. So also make sure you're following your pattern as you're going along. Count how many beads you need to have of one color before you get to the next. And when you get to the end of the row, meet me back here and we'll take a look at going in the opposite direction. Okay, so here I am at the end of my row. I hope you were there too. I hope this is easy for you because it's a really fun stitch once you get the hang of it, and you could do so many cool designs with it. Now, you see when I get to the end there, my beads were a little loose. So I'm just tightening things up. Pull the thread, pull that stopper bead down so it's really holding that first row in place. And your beads should be lined up like this. You don't want those big gaps. So now I'm ready to go add my third row. And to do that, I'm going to flip my work around. So again, I'm working away from myself. So I'm starting with the bead closest to myself and working up and away. So I pick up the first bead and I'm going to do the same thing that we did before. I'm going to go through that bead that's closest to me towards myself and then through the bead I've just added away from myself. Like that. Let's take one more look, but I'm sure you have mastered this by now. Let's see. So we're going to do it one more time. Through there and back in the opposite direction. The trickiest thing about this is going to be following your pattern. So just make sure when you're looking at the pattern that you realize that you start on one side and then you start on the other side. And when you look at the pattern, I've put arrows on there so you know which direction you're going in. Otherwise, your heart will end up not looking like a heart. But I tried to keep it a really simple design. So for this first time around, it should be pretty easy for you to get what you need out of it. Also, it's good to have square stitch as a stitch in your pocket because you can design in a grid. So any sort of graph paper you have lining around, you can make a square stitch design on that. Where with brick stitch, they line up like bricks, so it's a little off, and it's harder to just find paper, that you could use to design on. And it's harder to do things like letters and really direct shapes. But with square stitch, you could really make any sort of shape you can make on a graph paper. So I hope you guys will master this and enjoy it as much as I do. And I'm going to try to come up with some other fun projects. So enough blabbing from me. Keep working your stitch back and forth like that. We're just going to scooch through now, zoom through, just looking at how the pattern is developing. So you keep working on that. When you get to the end of this pattern and your heart is complete, then we're going to add the fringe. Well, first we'll lock in our threads, then we'll add the fringe. So keep working through one bead at a time. That's the peaceful part of beading. And I find in these dark winter days, it's really nice to just have something to keep your mind and hands busy. Okay, so here we are. We finished our top little square, and we need to get rid of this thread. But first we need to add our wire guard. So you see, I wanted to line up in the center there. So there'll be one center bead, and the wire guard will go to either side of that. And to do that, I'm going to run my needle back up through the whole length of my work. I do this because it's sort of a floppy stitch, square stitch. I feel like the work isn't as stiff as when you do brick stitch. So I like to just reinforce it where I can. So I'm going to run my needle through as much as I can to sort of get that reinforcing and to make the work a bit stiffer. So for this last one, I'm coming up halfway through the row because I want to get my needle into that center. It's the one to the right of the center bead. So I'm coming right up through there. There we go. And then I'm going to grab my wire guard. Like so. And then come down the other side of the wire guard. right into the bead, which should be right below it. So not the center bead, but the one to the side of the center bead, like that. And then again, I'm going to take my needle all the way down to the bottom of the work. Now, the thing with square stitch is you do pass through each bead quite a few times when you're just adding the beads. But so you could, if you're using the wrong thread or using a thread that's too thick, or if you are using a needle that's too big or your holes are too small, you will find you have trouble going through those beads again. But I have no problem because I'm using the right size of everything. So which is why the products you use when you're beading really do help you to be successful. So now what I'm doing is I'm just trying to get back up to that wire guard again because I just want to reinforce it. I always like to go through my wire guards twice. If you don't have wire guards, this could have easily been a set of 5 beads that I put on top that you could create a little loop with beads. But personally, I prefer the wire guards because there's no exposed thread. So I'm just going to go through this wire guard again. Okay, get rid of that stopper bead now. We don't need that guy. And he's just in the way. And yeah, so we're going to go back down through there. And then I'm going to anchor my thread by just going back and forth through some beads a couple of times. So here I am, just going back and forth. If you ever have trouble getting through a bead, like it's too tight in there, don't force it because these beads will break because they're made out of glass. So just choose a different direction if that happens. But as you see, using the right size thread and the right size needle on this piece, I don't have any trouble getting through these beads. There's plenty of space there. So here I am anchoring my final set of beads. So I'm just going to sort of loop around. I'm going around these 2 sets of 2 beads and I'm going to loop around them. So go through the top of ones and then the bottom and then up to the ones to the right to just create this loop, which creates tension and will keep our thread from unraveling. And when I'm done with that, I will clip it. And then that little thread that we started with, the tail from the very beginning, I will take that tail and I will thread a needle and I will also weave that into my work. So I'm almost done here. And I'm going to clip that. And then I will do that other tail, get rid of it. And then we're ready for our next part. Okay, so I'm going to take my nylon thread, and again, I'm going to cut about 5 feet of that, and then I'm going to stretch it. So clip that, see how it's sort of curly. You need to get those curls out, otherwise they will make your fringe hang funny. So it's very important, stretch your thread. And then I'm going to anchor this thread by doing the same sort of thing, weaving around 2 sets of beads, sort of neighboring beads next to each other. So I'm starting there towards the edge and I'm just going to weave around some beads and I want my needle to end up exiting on the outside edge of those bottom beads. Also, I want to say about this KO thread, and also Miyuki has a beading thread. They're pre-waxed. They do something special to the thread. I don't know what they do, but you don't need to wax this thread. I've never had problems with it knotting. So it does help you skip that step, and it is my favorite thread to use for that reason. And also it's good if you just don't want to have wax around too. I love this thread. So quality products really will help you have more success. So coming out of the bottom, there we are. We are ready to start our fringe. Now each row of fringe is 30 beads plus the little end bead. I'm skipping ahead because you don't want to watch me put beads on my needle. That's like watching paint dry. And I have my 30 beads there. I'm going to pick up my end bead and come back through all of those beads. And then I will also come through the first 2 beads in my row of square stitch. So here we go. Make sure you get all of those beads in your fringe. And then I'm going to come through those first 2 beads like that. Pull it up. And then I come down through the 2 neighboring beads. going to get you a better angle here. You'll see it in 1 second. Let's see if we could get it. Here we go. And sort of bending your work helps you get your needle into these beads if you have a tight spot like that. But just take your time. Don't force it. You don't want to break a bead. Take a breath. Find the way to get in there. Just don't force it. And when you get here, I like to lay down my work and just make sure my fringe is laying flat. Make sure it's not too tight, not too loose. And then we just keep going across like that. So 30 beads for each one. Put your 30 beads on, add your end bead of 1, and come back up through all those beads. And in between each one, especially if you're new to fringe, make sure your fringe is not too tight, not too loose. I like to sort of lie it down like this and make sure that it looks good. So let's get through this row of fringe, and then I think you'll see again how I just sort of massage the beads into place to make sure my fringe looks good. So we're going up through those first 2 beads, pull that tightly and slowly. This is where I always get tangled up on the previous row of fringe, so take your time there. And then you're going to come back down through the 2 neighboring beads. There we go. And then we're ready for our next row of fringe. And you just carry on like that. So here, see, I lie it down, pet those fringes, and make sure they're the way you want them to look. And do that with each row. And that's how you get good fringe, to make sure your tension is not too tight, not too loose. Here I am on my last one. I'm going to put this last end bead on. And then before I anchor my thread, I'm again going to just check out my fringe and make sure that things aren't too tight and not too loose. I've had a lot of people asking me lately about getting good tension on their fringe, and that's the thing, is you have to sort of pay attention the whole time and make sure with each one that they're not too tight and not too loose. Make sure you're using the right thread. You need a really movable thread, like a nylon thread, that's going to give you that flow. So here I'm checking my fringe, making sure it was good before I anchor, because once you anchor, then your fringe is stuck however you've left it. So I anchored that by doing the wraparound again. I went through lots of beads. I did my tension thing where I went around 2 sets of beads, clipped my threads, and here we have these cute little earrings. I want to see them in like 100 different color patterns. So tell me what you're going to use. I want to see what colors you decide, what color combinations you guys decide to use, because I think these could be cute in lots of colors. I tried to not go with a traditional, like sort of pinky Valentine color, because I think you can wear hearts all year round, right? Why not? So I have opened my French ear wire with my pliers, and then I'm just closing it back up again. Honestly, you could do these with your fingernails or like a pair of tweezers if you don't have pliers around. You don't necessarily have to have pliers for that. And there we go. We have these cute little earrings. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to get your free pattern down below, and have a wonderful day. Thanks.